Hello and welcome to our presentation today on goal setting and action planning best practices. My name is Charles Rogel and I'm the Vice President of Products and Marketing here at DecisionWise. I'll be our moderator for today's presentation. Our presenter today is Dr. David Mason. Hello everybody. David is a Senior Engagement Consultant and Master Trainer at DecisionWise. He holds a doctorate degree in Cognitive Psychology from Columbia University. He coaches leaders on 360-degree feedback results and then helps them create development plans based on their feedback, as well as he debriefs employee engagement survey results with executive teams and then helps them create action plans for the organization. He'll be sharing the psychology behind goal setting and also best practices on how to achieve goals. DecisionWise has been in business since 1996. We specialize in conducting employee engagement and 360-degree feedback surveys for organizations around the world, as well as coaching leaders on the results. We also utilize our online action planning tool called Depot to create and track individual and organization action plans. Today we'll be showing you a little bit about how that works as we talk about best practices. So to kind of frame our conversation today, David, I wanted to talk about what we'll probably address and what we won't address during the presentation. So I think when people think of goals and action plans and that sort of thing, everyone has kind of different methods or maybe habits for tracking those goals. The biggest one you see is people's desktops being littered with Post-it notes, as we see here. This is a picture of Dave's cubicle that I took before we came.
You're joking about looking at my computer.
Right, there's a computer. There's a Post-it note on his computer with about 5 or 6 things scribbled on it too. Other people love to-do lists, and so maybe your to-do list is on that Post-it note. Maybe you have it on a separate piece of paper or a file or a Word document, whatever you like to do.
When we talk about people's engagement and things like that, this is always the #1 thing. What's a good day at work look like for you? It's when I check off my to-do list.
Yeah, getting things done.
Right, which is why I make to-do lists like this, because then it's easier to check off.
Exactly. Check off your first thing on your to-do list. And then as people are more, I guess what we find is people are more mature or maybe educated about goals, they're really using SMART goals. We'll touch on SMART goals a little bit later. But the idea is that you have an overall goal with a list of maybe tasks or deliverables for each component of your goal in order to reach the overall goal. And then what we're not going to really talk about, so we're going to talk about SMART goals and more, kind of a higher level than a to-do list or maybe sticky notes. But we're not necessarily going to get into project planning. And so when you think of project, at least when I think of project planning, I'm thinking of this Gantt chart that we're showing here and multiple phases over multiple months or years to kind of achieve the overall project completion. So we're not building a building. This isn't a construction project. It's not necessarily developing a piece of software. This is more about individual goal setting as well as organization action planning around a pretty specific goal.
Yeah, you don't need something like this for, I want to stop yelling at my employees, or I want to start hitting deadlines.
Exactly. So the next topic is really approaches to goal setting, and we're showing a few here, and some of you might be familiar with these different approaches. We'll kind of talk about SMART and Agile goal setting approaches, but the one I think that a lot of people are familiar with is the static planning approach. Maybe it's called, it's more about your strategic planning for the year is a good example. So this is where, the senior leadership team or individuals in the organization get together and they map out the overall goals for the year. They walk away with some maybe key objectives or things that they want to accomplish, and then those goals or initiatives are kind of rolled out throughout the organization, and sometimes there's some momentum behind it and things get accomplished, but a lot of times things change. People forget what the overall goals were at the beginning of the year, and so there's some problems with static planning that we'll kind of talk about as well. Another way to approach goal setting is a historic method, and this is simply looking at what you did last year within the past month and determining what you might be able to do the next month. So how many sales did you close? How much weight were you able to lose maybe historically, and how much do you think you'd be able to lose this next month? So that gives you some perspective and helps you kind of make the goal at least realistic, having some historical data to work with. But historic goal planning, the problem there is you don't necessarily know, so if you don't have any history, if this is a new thing for you, you can't really use any, you don't have anything to base your goal setting on, so any context to use. So there's some problems with that as well.
But it's very intuitive, so you can see why people would immediately go into it, right?
Yeah, yeah. In fact, it works really well if you do have some history. And then we'll talk more about SMART goal setting and agile goal setting as well. So when we look at SMART goals, I think most people are very familiar with how SMART goals work. You probably have done training in your organization. And essentially, they're specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely. So this
or
is
at
really
least
good
those are the ones that they're very common. You can actually get lots of people just start throwing everything in there, specific, strategic, or for the achievable, attainable, agreed, action, ambitious, aligned, like relevant, realistic, resource, reasonable. You know what I mean? Like it's anything you want to fit in there. It's the best acronym ever.
It is, and so people like it because it's flexible for that reason. You can kind of make it relevant for your organization. It's really helpful. We find this with your performance management process. If you're sitting down with your employees to develop goals, here's some things to do, and for team planning and organization planning as well. One drawback to SMART goals, however, is that sometimes they're not flexible enough. And so if you're working towards a goal or an objective which you think might be a moving target in the future, SMART goals aren't very flexible to really achieve that. So they don't really allow for innovation. And so as you're thinking about developing a product, or especially in the software world, developing a software tool or a new app, that's where this term of clear goals came into place. And so this is more about agile goal setting or agile programming. And these were developed by Adam Creek, and you can see that they're similar in nature, so that there's a lot of overlap between SMART goals and clear goals. But again, they're collaborative, they're somewhat limited in scope, so we want to make sure that they're really well defined. They're emotional, so people can get excited about them. They want to kind of have an emotional payoff. Appreciable means that they can be broken down into smaller goals. So you can really come up with the specific tasks you need to achieve it, and that they're refinable. So this is kind of the key part of the model, in that you want to be able to have some flexibility to kind of change and modify this plan so you can kind of hit this moving target as you move forward.
Yeah, so the previous slides where it showed those four, that by no means is that a complete taxonomy of every possible goal-setting paradigm there is. It's just sort of an example to get us going and things like that. And when we talk about these SMART and clear goals and things like that, we want to make sure that we communicate these are great acronyms. The things that they're talking about are not wrong. They're so useful. They're incredibly, and we're making the assumption that anyone that's on the webinar with us right now is very familiar, at least with the SMART goals. Maybe clear is a little bit more new for you, but at least familiar with those, because you want all those things in your goals. Now, one of the things we want to focus on, though, is when you create these acronyms, sometimes they can be a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy in the sense that, okay, I made a SMART goal and it checks off all these lists. I made a clear goal, it checks off all these lists, and therefore it's a good goal. Well, no, that's not the case, right? What these should be looked at as more guidelines to help inform your goal-making decision behavior, rather than this is the end-all be-all. If I do this, then it's a good goal, and I can tell my manager, hey, look how great I am.
Yeah, because we haven't really addressed, okay, is it the right goal to begin with? Are you really addressing the right problem? And we're going to talk more about that and kind of how to arrive at that decision. So, so these are good models, and you'll find that you can use these quite successfully as you define what your goals are, and it really helps you to kind of isolate exactly what you want to work on to achieve those goals. So let's talk about the psychology of goal setting, the science behind developing goals, and kind of how this whole idea got started years ago.
Right. And the first thing I want to talk about is the idea of the science of goals. That really is not the correct terminology, and I'll tell you why. There's two things. One, goals is going to be a very SEO type term, right? Like if I say, oh, we're doing a webinar on goals, then we're going to get a lot of people that sign up for it, right? But here's the thing is, we're totally taking advantage of it, because goals is pop psychology in its purest form, right? You don't want the science of goals. You want the science of behavioral change. That's really what we want to do. A goal is a tool to arrive at behavioral change. If you ever just Googled the science of goals or best goal setting practices, you know what you're going to get? You're going to get 10 Google pages worth of results that are just people making stuff up, or talking about feel-good goal setting, or just things that aren't necessarily scientifically, empirically based. What we're talking about is the science of behavioral change. So I want to make sure that that's clear from the get-go. Now, here is this example, and this is why I love this example. Why does toothpaste taste minty? Because there was a goal, and the goal was to create behavioral change, the behavioral change of people creating better dental hygiene.
Yeah.
Okay? Let me ask you this question, and you don't have to answer, Charles. Maybe I'll just everyone rhetorically. How good are you at brushing your teeth? Do you ever miss a day or a morning? You know what I mean? Night and day, it's like clockwork. I won't do anything else in my day if I haven't brushed my teeth. Now let me ask you about this. How's your flossing? Right?
Yeah, well.
I imagine that's what we're getting. Is a lot of groans here in the audience. Is this idea of, oh, our flossing. Some people are, no, I do really good. They're going to write in the comments, excuse me, I just want credit for my flossing every day. But, 90% of us are lying to our dentist. How often do you floss? Oh, 2-3 times a week. They know you're lying. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But what do dentists say? They say, yeah, flossing is probably more important than even brushing. It's the most important thing. So why don't we do it as well? Why can't we create that behavioral change? Well, there's a key that was created back in the day, right? And the key is, why do we enjoy brushing our teeth? Well, let me ask you this. What's your reward for having brushed your teeth?
Oh, man. I don't know. It's so much of a habit now. I guess you don't feel so icky.
Right? Your icky mouth. It feels fresh. It feels clean. Yeah. Right? It's got that minty fresh. Well, what is it about toothpaste? What is it about cleaning your teeth that creates that? Is it as soon as you wipe away all the plaque that suddenly your mouth produces this natural mint? Well, no, obviously not. That is an artifact that people figured out to put in there because it rewarded them for having brushed their teeth. It felt like, oh, I have now completed this task, right?
And we're getting a lot of agreement from the comments as well. Jolie says, my teeth feel so nice and clean.
Exactly, right? Like, you can't go a day without brushing your teeth. There's no chance of it. It's such a hygiene factor, as it were, right?
Yeah.
But here's the thing is, why does toothpaste even foam? We talk about taste minty. What about why does it even foam? There's no need for it to foam. It's, again, an impact thing. Oh, look, I'm making a difference, right?
Yeah, so I've brushed my teeth every once in a while with baking soda, which is what they used to do in the old days, I hear. And number one, it's a terrible tasting experience. And then there's no foam. It just kind of just sits in your mouth, and so it's very unrewarding.
But how effective is it? It's probably equivalently effective, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, that's the idea. So all you need for that, if you get into the science of dental hygiene, is really you just need some sort of abrasive that cleans everything off, right? That's it. So the difference between toothpaste and flossing is the idea that it created a behavioral change. Now, what is it about that behavioral change? Well, in this instance, it was impact, right? We'll talk about that as we go through, but I want to point out a really good example of the difference between goal setting, flossing, and behavioral change, toothbrushing.
Okay, great. And so the case study here is with Pepsodent, right, and what they did to change that. And so the example we're sharing is actually shared in Charles Duhigg's book, The Power of Habit. And what they discovered at Pepsodent is that if they added, in fact, they had added in the mint flavor, the peppermint oil or doses of mint oil, just to keep the paste from kind of turning into liquid. So it kind of kept the consistency that they wanted in their paste to brush teeth. And then what they found is that it actually made the toothpaste taste better, and people would use it to brush more often. And then everyone started doing it.
And now we can't do without it.
Yeah, exactly.
So what this is an example of this idea between System 1 reasoning and System 2 reasoning, or Type 1, Type 2 reasoning, stuff like that, right? The difference between the rational mind and the unruly heart. And the best metaphor I ever heard of that comes from Jonathan Haidt with his happiness hypothesis, where he talks about the elephant and the rider. Yeah. Is that you need both to get where you're going. The rider, the rational, kind of points the elephant the right way. But if the elephant doesn't want to do it, is the elephant going to do it?
It's not going to happen.
No. So the idea is you have to have them work both in concert, right? And that's really our example. One of the examples I read once a long time ago was smoking. And it said, okay, smoking. If you were to be rational about it, what would you say? Well, okay, it's bad for your health and stuff like that. When you're filling out health insurance, one of the main questions they ask is, do you smoke or do you use tobacco or anything like that, right? Yeah. I think it's fairly clear that health-wise, it's definitely not a positive, right? And yet people still do it all the time. Yeah. So if that's the case, is it because they just don't know? They don't know that maybe smoking is bad? I think everyone, if you asked them and they were honest, would say, well, no, smoking's bad, right? I still like it. The value outweighs and stuff like that. It's because there's emotional connections to it as well as some physiological things, right? And so if you look at a cigarette billboard, what are you looking at? There's two appeals on there, an appeal to rationality and an appeal to an emotion. So the emotion is what? It's people having a good time, looking,
smiling, happy.
Yeah, right? Looking either masculine or party or just anything or super elegant or anything like that. It's all these emotional appeals. What's the rational appeal on a cigarette ad? What's appealing to the rational brain? Put you on the spot here.
Well, that I need that hit. You know, that, hey, yeah, I could really use a cigarette right now.
Well, that's still an emotional thing, though, right? Like, you know, I'm still feeling it. I need that, right? Yeah. The rational part on a cigarette billboard is the Surgeon General's warning.
Oh, right.
It's, this product will kill you.
Eventually, though. It's down the road.
Well, that's part of it, right? Look at the elegance. Look how great it is, stuff like that. And so you put up rational versus emotional. Emotional wins every time. And that's system 1 reasoning versus system 2 reasoning. One is the hot reasoning. The other is the cold reasoning. One is great for long term. One is great for short term, right?
Well, it's interesting. I had a good friend that quit smoking after years of trying to quit smoking. He smoked for a long time, ever since he was a kid. And he said the way he did it, the final time, this last time, he hadn't smoked for probably at least 5 years since then, is he went to a class where they taught him how to recognize those moments where he wanted a cigarette. So during the first week of the class, they said, okay, go ahead and continue smoking. Don't decrease the number of cigarettes that you smoke this week, but I want you to think about all the instances when you go to grab a cigarette and what situation were you in, what emotions were you feeling, and maybe what triggers caused you to kind of want to have that cigarette. So he did that for a week, and when he paused every time to take a cigarette to kind of understand the environment he was in and what he was feeling, what he was doing, it made him kind of recognize that he didn't really want a cigarette after all, didn't really have to have one. And so he almost found it to be a chore during that first week to continue smoking the same number of cigarettes, because all of a sudden he kind of interrupted that elephant in a way where he didn't have that desire. Gradually, he said, you know, they taught him some other things. He used to have his cigarettes in his front shirt pocket, and they told him to move them, so he put them in his pants pocket. And so then he found himself, when he wanted a cigarette, just having this automatic response to hit his chest to grab that pack of cigarettes.
Right.
And the cigarettes weren't there. That caused another interruption and caused him to stop, or at least decrease his usage, until he finally gave them up.
Yeah, it changes the script is how we call it, right?
Yeah.
And so why are we telling you this? Well, the very first thing we want you to understand in the science of behavioral change and goal setting is this idea of, when's the last time you made a New Year's resolution? When was the last time you kept that New Year's resolution?
Yeah.
We come up with all these rational goals. Hey, this would be good for me. You know what I should be doing? I should be saving for retirement. I should be exercising more. I should be eating healthier. Looking at it in the work environment. I need to hit my deadlines more. I need to recognize and reward my employees more. I need to do this or that, right? And we're great at this rational. But guess what? If we're not emotionally invested in it, no chance. And so how do we get the emotional invested in the same way? Well, there's two ways. One, it's very, like, if you just happen to be aligned, that's great. I want to get healthy, and guess what? I really get an emotional high from running. Now, we know from research that people that like running are mentally unbalanced and unstable, and there's something wrong with them, right? Because running is ridiculous. So
who would do that?
I say this because Charles runs marathons, and so I look at this as just a completely irrational behavior. I don't even watch marathons.
I assure you it is.
But the idea here is, if that's the case, then for Charles, going out and working out is not that big of a deal. For me, I'm a huge lazy slob, right? And so for me, going out and going through, why would I want to go through pain in order to feel healthy? That's not a life I want to live, right? And so for me, I'm not going to be emotionally invested. And so if that's the case, my rational brain says, hey, work out more. My emotional says don't. So we need to get those aligned. What's one way that we can get them aligned? Let me tell you. That was a rhetorical setup right there. One of the things we can do, and this is a behavioral theory that's best popularized in the book called Nudge by Thaler and Sunstein. They talk about this idea that we're so habitual with the things that we do that you can create that sort of some guidelines that will affect you. So going back to Charles's example of the person who was smoking and changing just the habit of where he grabs his cigarettes, that's a big deal. Organ donation is a big one, and I love this example. Organ donations between America and France. What would you say? Who does more?
Gosh, I would think the U.S. would do more since we're so much larger, but per capita or percentage-wise, I don't. I would assume France, I guess, since we're using them as a case study.
Yeah, there you go, right? And we don't want to just bash French people all of a sudden like that's a random webinar. And so the idea is that they definitely win per capita, and they win by a huge margin. And there's one subtle difference, is when you go to register for your driver's license in America, it says, hey, would you like to be an organ donor?
Right.
And you have to opt in.
You have to check the box.
France, exactly. In France, it says, hey, you're an organ donor unless you want to opt out. And then again, you have to check the box if you don't want to donate organs. And the difference, and the numbers, these are rough estimates, but the difference is like 10% of Americans will opt into organ donation, or maybe it's 20% of Americans opt into organ donation, and 80% aren't organ donors. Where in France, it's the complete reverse. In France, 80% are organ donors and 20 are not. Now, is that because the French are just so much more willing to help out and stuff like that? Well, maybe, but there's also the possibility that it just has to do with that habit.
Yeah.
Right? And so if you want to create better goals, you need to do that. Now, here's an interesting part about that, right? 80% of French people are willing, but part of it is they would then say, for organ donations, we will then come ask you if you want to then donate your loved one's organ.
Yeah, so the way the law was written is they had to kind of consult with the family after the person deceased to harvest the organs.
And when that happened, it gave them another chance to opt in, and look at that. It cut the donations in half. 40% refused. So they changed the law again, and this time it was an opt-out. Relatives are told of the plan to use the deceased adult's organs, but then they can opt out if they want. So we're told, we're going to do this unless you say otherwise. And guess what? Change the ratio back.
Yeah, and I don't think it was meant to be heavy-handed, because what they found from their research as they were studying this is that even though families would refuse initially, it was because they were in a state of shock, and then later they ended up regretting that decision of refusing organ donation. So this just made it easier and created a better solution overall.
Right. So ultimately, and you see, it's not because people are just for or against the behavior. It's the things that go into behavioral change. And one of those is just, we're known as cognitive misers. And I forget who coined the term now, and I feel bad about that. But cognitive misers, our brains require glucose to function, right? And so our brains do what they can to minimize using that. We conserve resources. And what that means is we conserve thinking where we can. And so our rational brain will say, hey, let's do this. But then our emotional is that conservation of resources, the cognitive miser. And so we will avoid making decisions if we can.
Yeah.
And this is one of those things. If you want to make a goal, one of the things you can do is make it so that you're not opting into the goal, but rather you have to opt out of the goal. And we'll talk about the specifics of what that means later.
So let's talk about more of the theory behind goal setting and behavior in more specifically.
Right. So if you look at things like the SMART goals and the CLEAR goals, a lot of them are making an assumption at the very beginning that this is something that you want to do, and that there's no really environmental factors and stuff like that, specific, measurable, attainable, stuff like that. Those are all very important things. And you know what? You can create a fantastic SMART goal, but however, if your attitude is such that you don't actually want to do it, then guess what? You're not going to do it. The subjective norm, the idea that, hey, I want to, well, for example, I want to quit smoking, and yet every single one of my friends smokes, right? I want to eat healthier, and yet we have a habit of eating cake every day in the office. Right?
Or everyone's going out to lunch to whatever, Wendy's or Chick-fil-A. Yeah,
right? And if that's the case, then guess what? You can have all the SMART goals you want. The subjective norm is going to get you out of that. And the last one, perceived behavioral control. The idea of, hey, you can actually do something about it. You can want to give up smoking. You can know that you want to give up smoking and you feel that it's the right attitude. But none of your friends smoke. But guess what? If you feel that you can't actually stop smoking, you're going to give up before you start.
Yeah.
That perceived behavioral control. All of those things add together, create intention, which then creates behavior. Now this model is not complete because guess what? Behaviors can also create intentions and attitudes, right? It's cognitive dissonance. And so this is just a good idea of saying, hey, there's more to goals and behavior change than just whether the rationality is going to work, right? And we talk about that.
Well, and this is helpful as maybe as a manager if you're trying to set goals with your employees, understanding, okay, what are their intentions? You know, what are their attitudes? Do they believe they can actually reach this goal? And that'll help kind of shape the outcome later on.
Absolutely. And in fact, this next model that I really enjoy because it captures a lot of those things really well. This is the sixth source of influence model. It comes from VitalSmarts. You can read it in their book, Influencer. And I love this model, right? It takes this idea and creates this 2x3 of motivation and ability, but divides it into three categories: personal, social, and structural. It's doing exactly what I was just talking about. So your personal motivation is, hey, I want to change. Your personal ability is that perceived behavioral control. I actually can change. But you also have to take into account box number 3, social motivation. Hey, are my friends doing it or are my friends not doing it? And then number 4 is you can then leverage that. Is, oh, my friends are helping me, then I can rely on them. This is one of the reasons they tell you make your goals public, because then you've got that social pressure, right?
So structural is more about the environment and things that are maybe not outside of your control, but at least things that are influencing your control over the situation.
Yeah, exactly. And so this motivational structural stuff, what are you incentivizing? So for example, one of the goals that I hate hearing the most is I'm going to lose weight, right? Well, hey, I know the best way to lose weight: cut off an arm, right? Like, that's super fast.
Sure.
But that's not really what the goal is. But what you're doing is, when you say I want to lose weight, is you're ultimately saying, hey, I want to be healthier, is what you're saying. But when you make the goal of I want to lose weight, that's very specific, measurable, attainable, so on and so forth, right? But guess what? You're incentivizing the wrong behavior. And so I can lose weight if I just eat less. And so there's the eating disorder side of it, right? But there's also, I can eat less. I'll just eat less In-N-Out burger on a day.
Right.
Well, that doesn't suddenly make me healthier all of a sudden. And then the ability is changing the environment. And this is what we talked about earlier with changing the idea of the structure around you as well. You know what I mean? The nudges, as it were, the opting into the organization and whatnot, right? So you can see how this covers a lot of that goal setting as well. And on the important aspects that goal setting is a much more complex behavior than just, hey, what's the problem? Let's fix it.
Yeah, so it's not just an overall goal and a list of tasks. It's understanding the influences, maybe the obstacles that you're going to hit, and how that goal is going to work out down the road, knowing your environment.
This is why for goal setting and behavioral change, the one I like the most is gamification theory. This idea that games have really captured and hijacked almost the goal setting process. If you want to think about the most addictive behavior, what is it, right? It's heroin, it's alcohol, and it's video games. Like, these are the most addictive things out there.
Those are mine, at least, right?
And so with video games, what they do is they have something called cascading information theory, and we're going to kind of co-opt that a little bit and call it cascading goal theory, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. But if you think about a video game, when you're accomplishing things, every game has an overarching end goal, right? Halo is to get rid of the aliens and save the world. Angry Birds is to get rid of the pigs and save all the eggs, right? Candy Crush, I'm not sure about Candy Crush, actually. That's just an exercise in futility.
It's a different level.
Yeah. I mean, I guess there's a map that you're going to, so eventually you're trying to arrive somewhere. But the idea being, and then Clash of Clans, obviously, right? You want to make your clan the most powerful, dominant clan. So everything is this idea of you have this overarching goal that then is broken up into levels, and each level is broken up into different tasks, and each task is broken up into different behaviors. And so this is what I call cascading goal theory. This idea that you start off at the top of the waterfall, and then as you cascade down, each one is going to be more and more important, right?
Yep.
Yes. Video games are fantastic with stuff like that. I can't say enough. You might not like video games, but you have to respect how good they are at getting people to do things.
Yeah, I can't get my kids off of them.
Yeah, exactly, right?
So we want to kind of change gears here and talk about some actual case studies and how we go about setting goals, what good practices. We're kind of going to take all this theory and summarize it down and put it to paper and try to create some good goals. So the first example we have here is of someone that is having trouble because they're constantly or more frequently missing deadlines.
Exactly. Now, this seems like the most cut and dry case possible, right? Hey, look, who's this? We'll call him Sam or Jerry or
Sam. Sam Jones.
Sam Jones. Okay. Call him Sam and say, listen, Sam, you're missing deadlines. So you know what? I'm going to sit down with you. I'm going to have that managerial interview, that performance review, and say, hey, look, your work's really good, but you miss deadlines all the time. So what do you do? And this isn't rhetorical. Answer. You know what I mean? Like, answer yourself. I can't hear you.
If you have some suggestions, go ahead and use the question toolbar, and we'll read some of those off and try to develop some goals around this particular problem. And I think as a manager, you're just saying you need to stop missing deadlines.
Exactly, right?
That's the goal, right?
It's so easy. Hey, you're missing deadlines? We need to stop missing deadlines. Great example, right? Now, however, have you learned anything thus far in our webinar? I would hope that you would have learned. As you start typing in, I can hear you backspacing right now. Oh, wait, not that goal. Okay. So the idea being, okay, well, what should that do? What should we be doing now for goals? Well, I hope that the first thing you're saying is we're not ready to create a goal just yet. We need more information.
Mm-hmm. And so we're going to turn to our spot of expertise, which is using 360-degree feedback. And typically, this is where, when we're coaching individuals, we see a lot of this information come up, and it really helps us get to the point of creating some real relevant goals based on feedback that's been shared from people that they work with.
Okay.
So I'm showing a sample report. This is kind of a summary page of the different leadership competencies and their overall scores. The red line indicates an average or norm for everyone that's taken this particular survey. And you can see what this individual scored high. They're high on integrity and trust, customer focus, communication, teamwork and collaboration, leading others. So there's some really good scores there. And then there's lower scores around planning and organization, results orientation, managing change, and then performance management.
Now that's interesting, right? So here's someone who's missing deadlines. Their business acumen is still good. If you look, they're not quite at the norm, but they're still good and things like that. And so you look at some of their highs and their lows. Integrity and trust. Okay, here's someone I can really trust. Why are they missing deadlines? That seems to not
yeah,
fit, right?
Usually if you can't rely on someone, you don't trust them as much either.
Exactly. Leading others, great teamwork and collaboration. Like, here's someone who I depend on, and yet they're missing deadlines. Okay, so something's going on here. Well, let's look at some of those other things. Hey, look, they're actually really low in planning and organization. That thing with the deadlines makes sense and stuff like that, right? But managing change and performance management. Performance management being the idea of helping someone who's not able to be up to par.
Yeah,
right?
So helping your direct reports stay on task.
Yeah, exactly. And they're not good at that. Oh, that's interesting. I wonder what that could mean. Managing change. This is someone who, when I look at, seems like a classic case of a really nice person. Someone who is fantastic at doing what they're doing, but when it comes to the hard stuff, when it comes to the hard conversations, the crucial conversations, the uncomfortable ones, that maybe they shy away a little bit, right?
Yeah. Well, they might value relationships a lot more strongly than they do actually getting things done. So they don't want to hurt a relationship by, getting on someone's back at the expense of then, at the expense of hitting a deadline.
Right. And how would that tie into goal setting, or goal setting in this specific case, right? They're missing deadlines.
Yeah. So
does that relate?
Here we're trying to understand their motivations behind the behavior, and so simply saying we're going to stop missing deadlines doesn't really change the way they're behaving with other people.
Here's the question you have to ask yourself, okay? Is this a knowledge problem? Is this something where if I said, hey, you know what, you're missing deadlines, that's a bad thing, and they're going to slap their forehead and go, oh my gosh,
I didn't realize.
Thank you. I thought deadlines were just suggestions, right? And maybe they are. Maybe you've created a culture where no one actually cares about the deadlines, right? I imagine that's not the case, though. So we're going to go into the assumption that, guess what, deadlines are important. So saying, let's fix that, they were already trying to.
Yeah.
So there's something else going on. Their rational is on board. So what's wrong with the emotional? Okay, well, let's look at this. Lacks focus. Okay, lacks focus. What does that mean? It means that could be manifest by too many things going on, right?
Yeah, so here I'm showing the derailer section of this 360 report. These are those behaviors that are detrimental to leadership success, and you can see that there's
so a higher score is worse here.
Yeah, you don't want to get a high score, but there's some, it's not necessarily, we don't necessarily see bad scores here. You can see the norm line again, but usually if it's in the sum area, then there's kind of a real issue that needs to be addressed. This person's showing some tendencies, though, when it comes to lacking focus, lacking confidence, and being too eager to please.
Okay, so now we're looking at what our hypothesis is correct. This is someone who really manages relationships and stuff like that, but manages them almost in a sweeps them under the rug kind of way, and just avoids conflict. Conflict avoidant is what I would peg this person at.
Yeah.
If I was talking to them, I'd say, hey, do you ever shy away from conversations? I guarantee they'd say yes. Okay, so how does that tie into creating a goal for missing deadlines? And feel free to participate. Throw in your questions in the question box and see if you want to guess before we get there, right? And then we'll give you credit if you do. And if you're wrong, we won't embarrass you, promise. But the idea is that, okay, they're missing deadlines. I'm going to throw this out there. You tell me if you think I'm correct, because maybe you can't say no when other people come to you and say, hey, can you do this project?
Yeah.
I think that's going to be a part of it. I also think another part of it is that performance management. When your direct report doesn't accomplish something, you swoop in and take the accountability and say, okay, well, if that's not going to get done, I'm going to finish it for them, right?
Yeah, and the benefit you have when you're coaching someone, obviously, is you can probe on these questions and figure that out.
Okay. And so I guarantee you that, because I've had this conversation many times, that this is what's happening. They're not saying no to other people, colleagues and superiors putting work on them, and they're also helping their employees too much instead of holding them accountable, right?
Yep.
And because they've now got too much work, they are not able to hit deadlines. And so you say, hit your deadlines, and they're going, I'm trying, I just have too much work. How am I supposed to be able to?
So I've switched the screen now to kind of show how we're going to develop this goal. I'm in our Depot action planning tool, and I've gone in and created a couple goals before our presentation. One is to hold team members accountable for deliverables, and the second one is to improve planning and organization of my tasks.
Okay, and that seems like, does that seem familiar to you, people on the webinar and stuff like that? Does that seem like the kind of goal that you would make in a normal performance?
Yeah, that would kind of be the general outcome, I think, of the discussion around this 360 or the issue, right?
Honestly, like, and this kind of goal setting is something I would see in probably 80% of performance reviews. You know what I mean? Like, I wouldn't even need to interview the employee, and I could guess that this is what you've already decided on as goals. This is totally just a standard kind of a thing, because this is stuff we all need to work on, because it's hard, because we don't do it, right? Right. So this is all stuff that we're comfortable with. Now, having said what I've said at this point, how comfortable are you with these goals? Charles, I'm going to let you speak for the audience at this point.
Yeah, so I look at this goal and say it's a good start. You know, there's some, it needs some more meat to it. Maybe I'll kind of click in here. There's no tasks or anything. You know, don't miss deadlines is kind of what this person's come up with so far. But it needs a little bit more structure.
Okay.
And then Melanie here says most managers set these kinds of goals. So this is what a manager would tell them to kind of do.
Oh yeah, right. And so, and rationally that makes sense. But emotionally, how invested are you when someone else gives you a goal, right?
Yeah, not so much.
Right. And so that doesn't work in relationships. We need to remember, we're not cogs. We're not machines. We're not programmable in the sense of, oh, I want my computer to do this now. Do it. We're emotional, and we have to manage these relationships. And so the idea here is, if you ever get into a disagreement with someone, and this is where we get into the actual like marital research and stuff like that.
Yeah.
If you get into a disagreement with your spouse or a loved one or someone who, you know, a life partner of some sort, what do you have to do when you're disagreeing? Well, the very first thing you have to do is you have to take a step back, right? You have to, in the cascading goal theory, I want you to go up one level. Okay, we disagree about this particular thing. Let's step back. Oh, where are we aligned? We're both aligned that deadlines are bad, and we're both aligned.
Good.
Yeah, sorry, missing deadlines is bad.
Yeah.
But we're both aligned that by meeting deadlines, we're helping the company more. Do you want to help the company? Are you invested in helping the company? Because if not, then we need to step back even further. You know what I mean? But for the most part, let's assume we're all on the same page, and that is, what does your organization do? Well, we help people with X. We help people with Y. We provide top quality service at a low price or something, you know what I mean? We meet all our vendors' needs. We do all these things. And if that's something you can find meaning in, then that should be your goal. I want to accomplish that. One way I can accomplish that, cascade down one level, is to say, well, I can make sure that my work is on time because then everyone else can work with me. Suddenly, you've created a goal and created more meaning. You've gotten more emotionally invested in it, right?
Yeah. Jonathan suggests that when you tie the goals to the longevity of their professional employment, it becomes an emotional goal. Now, one suggestion I was thinking of here with this guy is that relationships are important to this person.
Yes.
And so they're kind of afraid of kind of stepping on toes and souring relationships with people. But if they understood that by missing deadlines, they're hurting their relationship with their boss. They're hurting actually their relationship with their direct reports, because now they're on the hook to work maybe overtime or longer to try to get this deadline met. It just kind of puts everyone in a bad situation. That the outcome of missing deadlines has a worse relationship outcome for this person than it does in not speaking up or not holding people accountable or not saying or doing the right things.
Yeah, exactly. And I love what you've done there is you've taken it and you've cascaded. I guess cascades are a word. You've moved back one level, so you can see. Hey, listen, it's not about missing deadlines. It's about relationships. Hey, it's not about deadlines. It's about making sure the organization can work more functionally together. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's about making everyone's job easier. It's about X, Y, or Z. You can do it any number of ways. The key that you have as a manager to help with this direct report, or you yourself if you're working, is to step back and see what the larger goal is. Then you cascade down to the actual problem behavior. We call this the, what is it? The level of categorization. I'm blanking on the term now. we talk about this in cognition. It's just the basic level of categorization, right? If I draw you a picture of a bird and I say, what is that? Experts will say, oh, well, that's obviously a sparrow of this kind of genus. You know what I mean? No one says, oh, that's a vertebrae, right? You say, oh, that's a bird. That's that basic level of categorization. And that's what we're talking about with goals. Missing deadlines is that basic level of categorization. It's the obvious, it's the salient. But you need to step back and say, okay, this fits into the larger picture how. Then you say, okay, we're at that level. Now let's cascade down one and come up with these tasks that you've got on here, right?
Sure.
So not missing deadlines, what does that actually mean? That's too broad. Let's specify this some more. So Charles, go for it. Specify something for me.
So I think there's, in most cases, or kind of creating a generic task here, there's probably ongoing deliverables or weekly deliverables that are required. Maybe it's a TCP report or whatever they're calling it. So at least starting to hit the deadline for that weekly report you're required to.
Exactly. So that's a great one. So we'll look at the TPS report and we'll say my first task is to get it done this week on time. Okay. So that's one. Now, is that still too broad?
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. So, okay, so what do I have to do? So finish TPS report. Let's put in the due date here. Okay, so by next week.
I'll get it in on Monday.
Okay. And so we'll put in a task description. That means this. Now, what is the task to get to that point? So, well, to get the TPS report in, I have to get the information from Betty, and I have to have Jerry handle this part of it, and so on, right? And so with that, then I need to go and, okay, if that's the case, who's the one that's falling short? Oh, it's because Jerry's always late on his. And so the task now is to get Jerry on there and not to take over his work, right?
Yeah.
And so you just go down and stuff like that, and you can add as many goals as you want, as many tasks as you want in order to accomplish that. And then what the beauty of this is so let's add one more task in real quick of just get Jerry on board, something like that.
So sit with Jerry.
Star Wars on the mind.
Right.
Okay. Now you can add that, and you can put some due dates on that, and that due date's going to be over here. We're going to do that by Thursday, Friday? Okay, by Friday?
Yeah.
Okay, give them some time. And you don't have to put a description. We'll just add that, right? And now for each one of these, you can add how far I'm getting on this task, right?
Yep.
This is great. This is exactly what we want to do, is remember, think of every goal as a link in 4 goals. The really broad, most basic goal, the basic level of categorization, and then 2 more specifics after that.
So one thing we haven't really addressed is the emotional obstacles that he's going to encounter, right? So maybe he's trying to get some time with Jerry, and Jerry's just had an emergency or something come up, or he's
just belligerent.
Right. Yeah.
I don't want to have this fight.
Yeah. And so, so all of a sudden Sam's feeling like, okay, how am I going to get this from Jerry? Now I see one where my task is at risk, which makes the whole goal at risk.
Right. And there's 2 answers to that. One is this is just a general level of training on how to interact with people, communication, collaboration, stuff like that. That's the big hairy kind of goal, right?
Yeah.
The other one is by articulating it and knowing what you're going into. You've created an expectation. You've set for it. And then here's a little tip that you should always do when you're planning for goals. Plan your failure. So what's your failure going to look like? Say, oh, well, I'm going to go to Jerry, and he's gonna mouth off to me and stuff like that, and say, okay, so what do I do if that's the case? And then you've already got a plan in place. And if he doesn't mouth off, then that's a win. That's gravy, right? And so that's part of that emotional component is you need to plan for it so that it doesn't blindside you.
So it's really making these tasks as descriptive and specific as possible so you know the exact steps to get there.
Exactly. One of the biggest keys to good behavioral change, to good goal setting, is meta-awareness. Meta-awareness of yourself, how you're going to react, what your emotional components are, so on and so forth.
Okay, so I want to change gears because we want to talk about team goals and also organization goals, and kind of go through some examples there. It won't take as much time.
Yeah, whenever we think of goals, we always think of individuals, but these are as important, if not more important.
Yeah, because you get into this dynamic with the team, and all of a sudden you've got a whole bunch more variables to deal with.
Exactly.
And so what we're showing here is some of the obstacles, I think, that teams face in general that also apply to goal setting and goal making. And so I'll kind of describe some of these, and Dave, if you want to talk about the resolution or good goal setting practices as some of these issues come up. Mm-hmm. So the first one we have here is functional team primacy, and this is where the management team members put their functional teams ahead of their leadership team. So here it would be, the manager over marketing, for example, and then you got your manager over operations and customer service. They're all together in the same senior leadership team meeting, but they're all vying for the needs and specific problems that their teams have, and they're not really thinking as a team together. They all want they're all kind of protecting their own turf.
Yes, very zero sum.
Yeah, which leads to some internal competition sometimes. So leaders are wasting effort competing internally rather than collaborating, cooperating to beat the external competition. So in other words, I need my marketing resources. I don't want my marketing budget cut because we need to make more hires over an operation. So I'm now fighting with my peer over that particular issue.
Yeah, exactly.
Which then kind of cascades to this strategic misalignment. So employees hear different messages about the strategy depending upon which leader is speaking. And so that's really difficult for a team or these team leaders going back to their teams and translating the overall mission and goals of the team differently. Mm-hmm. So now employees are working off of different scripts, so to speak, to kind of get to the same outcome, which doesn't happen.
Exactly, which goes back to what I was saying earlier. If that's the case, you need to step back and get back to where you are aligned. Mm-hmm. Misalignment is a huge obstacle.
And so when that happens, then this idea of lack of trust comes into play, because you realize that so-and-so doesn't have your back. They're only interested in their customer service problems. They have no care about what's going on with marketing and the goals I'm trying to hit. And so that leads to this lack of trust, which then leads to avoiding conflict, little feedback given, and then damaged relationships. The final item here is more about personality types. And so team members tend to discount others whose data gathering or decision-making, communication, or organizational styles are different from their own. So if I sense that you work differently than me, maybe you're an introvert and I'm an extrovert, I'm going to have a different opinion about your maybe abilities or capabilities to get things done.
Right, and that's the thing is, a lot of these things are microcosms of what it takes to work on the individual level as well.
Yeah.
And so, again, the main things you want to do to fix this is take a step back and align yourselves on the bigger ones, and then cascade the goals down. If we're on the same page, that fixes the trust, the alignment, and the internal competition if we all recognize where we're at, right? Trust is such a huge aspect of that, and you can't trust each other if you're going for different goals. You just can't.
So another case study I wanted to share is regarding organization goal setting. So we worked with a large healthcare organization, and one of the questions on their employee survey said this organization cares about employees. And they received a low score on this question. It was very concerning to them because, number one, they wanted employees to feel like they were cared about. And number two, it was a big issue because it's a competitive environment. They're trying to attract and retain the best people and also keep people engaged. And they felt by focusing on this one area, it could really boost all of those other areas. So what they decided is that in order to increase this feeling that employees felt like they were being cared about, they wanted to make senior leaders more visible. And this means the senior leaders in each of the different hospitals and locations would be more interactive with their employees and staff. And so they came up with an initiative called rounding, which simply meant getting out and about, doing rounds, kind of like the physicians would do. And they also instituted a 1 hour of open office time each day. So these leaders would schedule this open office time where employees could come in and talk to them, and everyone knew about this and was aware that they could go talk to their leader. Finally, they added a question on the employee survey for the next year that said, leaders of my department are visible on a regular basis. And they told their leaders about this, that they were going to be measuring this and trying to hold them accountable for this performance. Well, the good news is that the score for this question the next time they took the survey went up by 4%. And so, and there were other benefits to this as well, but this was one of their big initiatives for the year to make this happen. And so they were pleased to see that their employees actually did notice a difference in the amount of care that they saw from the organization.
Well, and just from a quantitative point of view, 4%, maybe some of you aren't so impressed. I assure you that 4% in this case was a very hard thing to do, and a very huge improvement. The effect size statistically was incredibly large because of the amount of people. It was hard to move it that much. One of the things they did that I really enjoyed was they started putting faces on every email. That's something that seems like such a small thing, but just by connecting that way, somebody said, "Oh, they know who I look like, and I know who I'm talking to." It was a big deal, I thought.
Yeah,
that doesn't get enough credit.
And you know, this is really important because again, the goal was created at the organization level. It was rolled down to all the leaders, and so leaders were creating goals around being more visible with their employees. And then HR also had the ability to kind of track this and see, okay, let me see how people are doing on these different goals and all these different areas. Well, I don't have any numbers in this example. And they could see also by the type of task, like leadership visibility or communication, how many different goals were set. So it gave HR the ability to see if leaders were really implementing and doing these things instead of waiting until the next year to take an employee survey to see if any action was taken.
Right.
So I'll switch gears here again. I wanted to provide this image. You've talked a lot about this, Dave, already, this idea of a cascading goal. So just make sure those tasks are specific and build up to that goal.
Yeah, and I want to make sure that you think of this as an iterative process. The idea is that if you come at it from task, goal, that it's stairs moving up to the ultimate goal. And that if you want to figure out what your specific task should be, you have to, again, start at the goal and work your way back down. And the goal should never be something so specific as I want to meet deadlines, or I want to improve patience and stuff like that. It should be really high level, really at the level of values and emotional. And then you create specific tasks. And so what we normally think of as goals, that's where we're putting that in the task function. Your goal should be the really high overarching thing. Mm-hmm. Everything else should be underneath. Those are tasks to get you to your ultimate goal.
So takeaways from organizational goals, we've listed 6 best practices here. Number 1, sponsorship. So make sure that your CEO and executive team are on board and that they're really pushing these goals as well. That the direction gets set from the top. So you don't want this to kind of come in sideways from the HR department or something like that, or else they'll recognize it as not the official gospel, so to speak, of the organization. Exactly. And then we're showing a few questions that we use on employee surveys to help illustrate a couple points here. Number 3, I see how my work fits into the overall mission of the organization.
Impact, right? And if you remember that example you gave with the pie chart, half the goals were set around impact. What about toothpaste? It's because they saw the impact. Everything is about impact in that you need to be able to see what you're doing, because then that ties into the larger feelings of it, right?
Yeah, it's kind of like that line of sight or having alignment with the organization goals.
Exactly.
And so once you're able to set the stage, people have direction and know what to do. Otherwise, if you roll out employee survey results, for example, without kind of giving the overall organization direction, your manager will kind of be flailing around trying to figure out what they should be focused on. Mm-hmm. Number 4, I trust that senior leadership is looking out for me.
Yeah, you need that trust. And we talk a lot about transparency. Transparency is good as an indicator of trust, but transparency itself isn't what makes it good. Transparency is an indicator that, hey, senior leadership wants you to be involved. They want you to see the impact. They want your employee voice and things like that. And that's why that's so good if you want to create that organizational goal level, because you got to create that culture. And that culture is we're all one, moving for the same thing. If everyone's looking out for their own, you're just not going to get it.
And then we have communication here, not just communicating top down, but really bottom up. So suggestions for improvement are listened to and taken seriously is one of the employee survey questions we like to use.
For what it's worth, communication top down, everyone always talks about communication, and the top down communication is not something that is weak in a lot of organizations. Could it be better? Absolutely. But you know where it's always weak? You know where it's really atrophied? Employee voice. People want their voice to be heard, and not because they're arrogant or egocentric, but because it makes them feel like they're connected as part of it. If they're trying to tie into that larger goal, and you as an organization need to let them, and that's how you get that.
And then finally, progress reports in some way. So feedback and accountability. Again, you need to share these goals. You need to see how people are doing, hold your managers accountable, share the success stories that you've heard in the organization. That'll really create momentum and buy-in.
Yeah, I can't say enough about that.
So, Dave, we want to kind of wrap up with some of these goal-setting tips, and you've touched on some of these before. One was this term meta-awareness. What did you mean by that again?
Meta-awareness is this idea that you are being very deliberate about the things you do and the ways you feel. So why am I missing deadlines? Oh, well, it's not because I just hate doing things the right way.
Right.
It's because there's larger things at play, right? So you need to be aware of why you do the things you do.
Planning for failure.
You're going to fail. It's just the nature of it. And so you need to set that expectation ahead of time and know how you're going to do it. That is part of your task setting procedure, is saying, okay, when I bump up against the wall, how do I do it? Because too many times when we fail, we say, oh, well, this little part fell through, and so now I'm just going to give up on the entire goal, right?
Yeah, so what's your plan B, plan C kind of thing?
Exactly. And that helps you stay emotionally invested.
Loss aversion.
Yeah, no, I love this term, loss aversion, right? This is why negative things stick out so much more than positive things, because we have this natural tendency for loss aversion. So when you're setting a goal, don't set a goal of, I'm going to not eat sweets today. Set a goal of, I'm going to eat healthy things today. The idea being that when you set a goal of something you're going to obtain, as long as you don't have that obtained, you're going to feel a loss. Because because we're just programmed that way. Whereas if it's, I'm not going to do something, and then you do it, you've actually gained something. You know, I gained some sweets. It's actually kind of a win,
yeah.
Right? And so you want to flip the script. And so anytime you make a goal, it's, I want to make a goal to do something, not to not do something.
Okay. Outcomes versus the process.
So research shows that if you give someone an outcome goal and say, I want you to not miss deadlines, they're not going to do as well as if you give them a process goal of, I'm going to make sure that I have this conversation with all my employees before the deadline comes, right? And then ultimately the best goals are the ones that involve both, because I'm going to do these things so that I don't miss deadlines. But the idea is you just give someone an outcome, hey, do your best on this, they're not going to do as well. So you want to make sure that you're focusing more on the process than the outcome, partly because the environment gets in the way of the outcome.
Mm-hmm. Random reinforcement.
This is something that if someone does something well and you just reward them every time, eventually it's going to come into an economic decision. Oh, yeah, well, I don't want the reward this time, so I'm not going to do it.
Yeah.
Whereas if it's random reinforcement, this is behavioral conditioning at its finest, is if every now and again you do something good, someone just randomly rewards you, that is easily the most behaviorally conditioned way to get someone to do something. And so you want the random reinforcement. So you don't pay your kid for good grades. You pay your kid randomly for good grades. And
so when I'm playing the slot machine, I don't want to win on every pull, right? Or else that would just ruin the experience for me. I want to win on every maybe 100th, 200th pull or something like that.
There's a reason gambling's so exciting.
Environment.
So this is just the general catch-all of when we talk about goals, really focus on what the environmental structures are in the way, because we all too often just forget about that. We've talked about that at length already.
And then we also talked about identifying that real problem.
Yeah, step back and really go up the waterfall until you figure out where the ultimate thing is, and then cascade down from there.
Yeah, what are the motivators? Why am I doing this? Why am I not doing this?
Exactly.
So that concludes the amount of time we have for today. We're not going to talk too much about performance management or our leadership intelligence model. We'll save that for next time. I did want to provide the codes for the webinar today, the HRCI and SHRM recertification credit codes. You can see them on the screen. I'll also be sending an email with the same information. The slides are attached in the handout section, but I will be sending those in an email as well. And I just wanted to maybe address a couple questions as we have a minute or two left. And that is, have you done or seen research about how willpower affects employees' ability to meet their goals? This is from Danielle.
Oh, Danielle, that's a great question. And in fact, we are witnessing an upending of a revolution right now, because there's a lot of research on willpower that I was very familiar with, and the idea that willpower is a finite resource. And so if you get people to use willpower, that's them fighting against their emotional nature, right? And that's because you can run out of that, eventually people will give in, right? What they've done is the problem, and this just came out this week, is a lot of these early seminal experiments on willpower as a finite resource are having trouble being replicated. And so right now, the psychology community is in a little bit of like a, oh shoot, what do we do?
Oh really?
Yeah, so the answer I will give you is based on what we've already known, and we'll wait to see how this plays out, this replicability crisis that we're seeing about willpower. But for the most part, it sounds right. that willpower is this finite resource. You don't want to ever rely on it with goals, which is why the elephant and the rider is such a good metaphor, is you want to get the elephant going, and you don't want to have to try and push against the elephant.
Yeah.
And so don't ever rely on willpower. That's only there for those emergency cases. It's like a guardrail on a mountain path. You want to have it, but you don't want to be reliant on it.
So another question from Melanie here is, how do you deal with employees that have personal goals that conflict or get in the way of company goals?
And that's exactly what we're talking about is, you know what, you're going to have that. And so you have to kind of get people aligned in the same page and say, okay, where do we have shared goals? And now let's see if we can compromise and figure out how we can both accomplish those. And here's the problem. Sometimes you're going to have employees where they're like, I'm just here to get mine.
Yeah.
And you have to determine if their benefit outweighs the cost of them doing that. And this is why we talk so much in other webinars and trainings about organizational fit, is you really want to make sure that people fit, and that's probably the most important criteria when hiring, more than actual capability. People can always learn capability, but you can't learn fit. You have to find that alignment, and you have to be motivated to do it. Yeah, so that's a really tough one.
Yeah, and she says, and they don't recognize it either. I think sometimes people, it might be helpful. Of course, you need to kind of help them recognize how there is a disconnect between the goal and mission of the organization.
And that's that meta-awareness.
But a lot of times you recognize employees are kind of in the position or the job role they're in for, and they recognize it as a temporary basis. I want to learn and do well here. I then want to be a manager, or I then want to take my skills and be an entrepreneur and do my own thing. Right, so they kind of see it that way, and but helping them know, or at least both understanding it, yeah, this is temporary. I'm going to help you learn and grow as much as you can while you're here, and framing all of those tasks that way is very helpful.
And that's something we're still getting used to, because we're still trying to work our way out of the paradigm of work there for 40 years and get your gold watch, is we need to start looking at employees as temporary and being like, I'm just going to take advantage of you as much as I can while you're here. And we're both aware that this is not your permanent stopping point, because it just can't be. There's just not enough room for advancement in organizations.
Yeah. One question from Jolie was regarding just rolling out an employee annual feedback and goal setting process and using a system to do so, and then trying to get managers buy-in to use the tool and see the value of it. There's a couple items here that we use. One is, of course, they need to get in there and use it. Part of it is tying in other information so they have an excuse to get in there, whether it's your employee survey results or other types of things that they can actually access there. But if they see it as something that's going to complement or at least help them work with their employees better and track those results, and it's easy to use, that's easy. The other thing is to celebrate the successes. So you're going to have champions that are using your tool and are doing really well with it and seeing good results. You'll want to leverage those experiences and share those with other people, so that they then get curious about, oh, how they use it, what's going on. And so maybe you kind of develop a best practices group. You start learning from managers how they're doing it, how they're using it in cool and neat ways, and then other people get more excited about it.
And one thing I'd add to that is the gamification theory, or we talked about cascading information theory. We touched on that just briefly. But the idea of don't require them to just jump into the action planning tool. Like the one we showed, Depot, it's really deep. It's really robust. There's a lot of stuff you can do with it. Don't go in there and be like, okay, now avail yourself of every single option.
Yeah.
You want to be able to go in and be like, hey, do the bare minimum. And once they get comfortable with that, where it's not too much out of their daily grind, then they'll be like, oh, I can do this too. They'll be like, oh, I wish it did this. Oh, guess what, it does. And then they'll be able to slowly acclimate. But if you throw too much at them at once, then like we talked about with Melanie, that's going to affect their willpower on it. They're going to be like, oh my gosh, this is too much to learn. I'm not interested, because it's not a valuable enough resource at that point. So you have to help them step easily through it. And this is with any action planning tool. Don't make them do every single feature at once.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I like your idea of possibly rewarding them as they increase in their ability to use it and put more data in. And there's ways to track it and kind of help them achieve.
Yeah, one of the things you do is you have those levels, like, oh, you're certified, you're a certified Depot ninja. You know what I mean? Like you see people do things like that, and that really helps, because, oh, look, I have a reward. Gamification is best.
Well, Dave, thank you very much for the presentation. Thanks everyone for attending. Look forward to my email with a link to the slides and the codes for HRCI and SHRM credit, and we look forward to having you all join us on a future presentation. Thanks, everybody.